Hello to everybody. We're going with the second part of this lecture. Its title was Invisible Cities. As you remember, last time we were start with this sequence of slide following the suggestion of this book made by Italo Calvino. And we talk about two category of cities. He chose this kind of a category to explore, each part of each aspect of the city, and was the city of memory and city and desire. This time we go on and we have some other category, and I chose for you. And we talk about the thin cities. That was probably the most abstract category, and as we see, and it's and then the city and sign, and cities and eyes, and continuous cities. As you know, this was just a suggestion, this book, because we want to follow in this novel. We try to talk about the city, and especially the part of the city that are not really visible. So what is immaterial but belongs to the city and to our experience of architect. So let's go. With the next. And one of these thin cities, Marco Polo described to the Khan, is Ottavia. And Calvino described Ottavia in this way: if you chose to believe me, good. Now I will tell how Ottavia, the spider web city, is made. There is a precipice between two steep mountains. The city is over the void, bound to the two crests with ropes, chain and catwalks. It's a very, very strange condition that introduces us to this kind of a consideration about everything is immaterial, is abstract. For example, the idea of aspiration or needs that are not exactly material. In the city, there are sometimes places built to support our immaterial aspiration, related not exactly to basic needs. To inhabit a place is also to be able to find answer to the needs of our inner world that thus represent our feelings, dreams and aspiration. And this painting is very suggestive, in my opinion, made from Martin van Heemskerk in the middle of 16th century. It's just a representation of probably Arcadia world where the nature and architecture were mixed together. It's a very unusual representation. But to understand better, we can try to follow how Calvino defined the thin cities. And he said, I started looking for a new definition, and I took a group of towns that were a bit abstract, airy, and which I ended up calling thin cities. He wrote the cities, and then he decided the category. And so he has some of this city, some of this part of the city that not really belongs to any other category, and they're very abstract. Talking about this kind of abstraction, probably spirituality is one of the category we have to consider. So man's search for spirituality has led him to seek closer contact with the cosmos and divinity. That visible tension toward the events, assimilating natural forms such as trees, even in architecture, and rendering it in its slightest interpretation. If you look at this, especially this part of this painting is the background. No, you see that there is a city on the sky, and it's very particular in sense of. But you have to consider that this is just this part of the main painting. So it's a small part of a big complex painting. But the story is the main theme is the adoration of a lamp. A lamp obviously is the symbol of Christ. But the presence of the Holy Spirit on the center of and all this line, the geometrical enter in the picture, and they're really strong related with this the landscape made with this very elegant forms of trees and with all the towers of the city. So there is something that try to make this connection between the holy and God and the humanity. Think that in the main painting, this is God, and he looks this what happened down, no? And it's like if he was looking his city probably. So it's a representation of the city of God, of a part of the city of God. And the example of the search which tend to detach from the materiality of our existence are found in the Gothic churches, and there are a lot of this amazing building in the north of Europe, in France, in Germany, and also in Italy. But the most interesting are in the north, because they are used to work with the with the wood structure, with the timber structure, and so they are assimilated as the lightness of the trees. And King's College Chapel in Cambridge is one of the most interesting example, because the lightness of this building is something that is really unusual. In other paintings we find this magic atmosphere. One is the Adoration of the Magi by Hieronymus Bosch, made in 5010. Also here in the background detail, this part is this is a detail of this part. We see a representation of a cities where all sense of reality is lost, offering us an opportunity to imagine by assimilation, transported into the city through the artist's vision, with the same emotional tension depicted in the main scene on the right. So the background and the city are part of the feeling of the main painting. The construction of a cathedral has also been a way of participating and identifying with both a religion and community identity, bringing together a generation who for centuries have worked on the same building. Example, the construction of Milan Cathedral lasted 406 years, from 1386 to 1892, and another example is in Barcelona, the most important Antoni Gaudí building, the Sagrada Familia, that began in 1882 and is not yet finished. Its completion is expected in 2000, 2026, that was the centenary year of the architect's death. In this building we can find a lot of suggestion in terms of use of the structure, and also in this case are looking like trees, and gave this sense of dimension between the earth and the sky. And then the use of the light, for example, the color that the colored glasses gave to the space inside, give a lot of an amazing spiritual experience. It's interesting to explore this idea of lightness, because we have also in our time, in contemporary time, a very strong experience of this kind of structure. Especially lightness of structure has found a new impetus in the use of innovative material such as steel, and facilitated by the industrial production. Glass and steel are for the first time the principal construction material needed for an absolutely immaterial building, lighter and brighter than ever before. And one of these buildings was the Joseph Paxton Crystal Palace, probably the first building with this quality, that was built for the first Universal Exposition, which was held in London in 1841. This building displayed goods and products for all over the world, and so the city became also a place of universal exchange. But inside the building, and Paxton, was used to build winter garden and special building for plants. You can see there were trees and water, so was a sort of a microcosm, something that was really new for that time. Tensile structures such as the Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol by Isambard Kingdom Brunel from 1864 made it possible light and load-bearing elements, and that was an example also how light can be a structure using this new material. Also in the last century, talking about 1972, Frejotto experimented with large roofs with tensile structure such as those built in the Olympic Stadium in Munich that still remain an impressive experiment of lightness and new kind of structure. But it's also there are also some places in the city more related to other activities, not exactly spirituality or trade or some. For example, a special place like Luna Park for play and enjoy the time after work. And the story of this place was very interesting. Frederick Thompson and Elmer Skip Dandy are the founders of Luna Park. They had in 1901 the occasion of the Pan American exhibition in Buffalo, created an attraction called A Trip to the Moon. The attraction had a resounding success with the public throughout the event, drawing attention to the two creators. At the end of 1902 season, the two partners obtained the long-term rental of the area occupied by an old amusement park, the Sea Lion Park, rebuilding it and calling it Luna Park. When they decided to name the Coney Island Park, Elmer Dandy suggested naming it after his sister Luna Dandy, and it is likely that the coincidence with the name of the spacecraft favored the definitive choice of the name Luna. So there was a mix of story about the name of Luna, but the name of Luna became the name Luna Park became universal, no? And also in Europe, in Italy, and everywhere we call them Luna Park. You see the picture of this a postcard from the Coney Island Luna Park, and they represent very well how interesting was this place, because it was full of emotional part, describe other place in the world, and attraction very funny. And the park quickly became the second largest park on Coney Island, and the architecture was amazing and full of electric lights. Considering that electric light was still a widespread novelty at the time, so the first time we had so massive use of electric light in a place that was just for entertainment. Two fires partially destroyed the park in 1945, stopping its activity, unfortunately. But a third fire in 1946 canceled any further possibility to or rebuild of the park. In 2005, the Coney Island Development Corporation proposed the Coney Island Revitalization Plan, a vast building plan for the recovery of large areas of the Coney Island Peninsula, which, in addition to 5,000 residential units and commercial areas, included the resurrection of Luna Park, that in 2010 was finally reopened. And this is still there. So you have this picture here on the right, with the main color strong, that belongs to the new Luna Park. Obviously the other two ones represent how the light in the night make it this place very, very magic, very unusual. And the presence of the light is something that changed the atmosphere of a place. Sometimes they were used also in special moments or in special season, like for example in a patronal feast in the south of Italy. There every town or every city during this days, a week or 10 days, they're covered by these lights, you know, that make change every street and represent this special time. At the same time, this kind of light structure can change the street where the sun was too hot. For example, in Seville, with a stand, you know, stretched between the two sides of the street. Another category are the sites, the cities and signs, and probably the last picture we saw, the last things we talk, light, for example, are also signs in the city. And Tamara was one of that cities he talked about, and said, finally the journey leads to the city of Tamara, and you penetrate it a long street thick with the signboard jutting from the wall. The eye does not see things, but images of things that mean other things. Pincers point out of the drawer's house, a tankard, the tavern, Halbert the barracks, Scales the grocers, and so on. So we are used to see and to communicate with the language in the city, but also the architecture as a language. No, I mean usually when we visit a city, the building communicate with us. They speak to us in a language that has been structured over the time. We associate forms with typologies and the activities they host. We recognize a church, a theater, a stadium. We can tell the city as a whole from which this particular building emerged as a reference. But it's not always like this. It is in this Taddeo di Bartolo view of Rome, made in beginning of 15th century, when we can see the sequence of building, and there probably we can understand also the typology. All of them are monuments, so the description of the city is made with the main monument. They represent more the part of the city. And there is also a long story of description of the characters of the architecture, and starting from the Greek architecture and from Vitruvio, for example, in Roman architecture, and then in the Renaissance time in the book of Leon Battista Alberti. And this one you can see on the right is Francesco Milizia, Principi di Architettura Civile, made in 1781. The language of the city is full of variation. So it's not always, there is not always the same language, no? And this variation will constitute the great wealth inherent in diversity. The language and signs that the city communicates to us are not always linear, and many times they are ambiguous. But this too is part of the variation that enrich the discovery of any city. Remember the story in Genesis that tells how men were building a tower, the Torre di Babele Tower, no? And that their presumption of approaching God was the cause of the loss of a common language and the reason for the failure of the project. This extraordinary painting by Peter Bruegel tells us about an extraordinary city construction site that is doomed to fail. You know, it's an amazing description, and it's very interesting to enter, if you have the opportunity to see this, enter in the detail and discover how many details you can find, and how he was lost in this description, thinking about this massive sequence of arches, and seems that this tower was built on a existing rock, but on the top of especially in the last part, we have the impression that some of the structure belongs to example like the Colosseum in Rome, and so it's impressive the differences of proportion between the city and, for example, the castle. It is smaller. It's a smaller part. It's a very smaller part of this picture, but the reuse of a visual language over the century has generated affinity patterns that overlap the originals. The recovery of the language of the past has produced an architecture that we call eclectic, articulated in various expressions like neoclassic, neogothic, neo-renaissance. And we have three examples, amazing example of eclectic architecture. We have the Nicolas Ledoux Saline Royale at Chaux, Arc de Senat in France. That's neoclassical, and then in the middle, the facade of Santa Croce in Florence that looks like a neo-Gothic, like a Gothic, but it's neo-Gothic. And another amazing example is this building made in beginning of 20th century, so quite recent, in Genoa, as Castello Mackenzie, for the family Mackenzie. There was a British, probably a Scottish family living in Genoa, made from Gino Coppedè. The Washington Capitol, the dome, refers to the great European structure such as the Pantheon. The left side there is the first dome built and then replaced from the current by the current one, and the first looks really like the Pantheon. The current one seems to be more referred to St. Peter in Rome or St. Paul Cathedral. But it's just the language the reference, because as you know, the structure was was a steel structure, and so it was a very different kind of structure. And the language of holiness and the representation of religious power is reproduced even for a secular institution. But we have to say that the classical language has been acquired by neoclassicism and has become the language of revolution and rationality. That are the following link between what happened in Europe in the 18th century and the born of democracy in USA. Talking about the light, the presence of the light has changed the city, making nightlife possible even outside. Lights have created new scenarios and new atmospheres. Signage, and in particular the luminous signage, has become a communication tool acquiring its own language and transforming the urban scenario. Painters took this transformation, especially in the 19th century. For example, Pissarro tells us about Paris and at the end of the 19th century, where the lights were signs and all the activities that overlook the boulevards. In this case, was one of the most famous boulevard in Paris, so the Montmartre Boulevard. And also in Van Gogh painting, light certainly that we certainly consider an immaterial element, define a physical space, a sort of a room outside in the street, and make this warm atmosphere and make this relation between the light of the stars in the sky. Cities are increasing, in the last century, often made by seniors in light, building, and superstructures. His huge mass of sign generated a cacophony and perhaps a magic chaos where sounds, noises, light, signs all add to the language of the shapes that building communicate to us. It is the language of the city as we know today. Is our city in a sense. And we have this, you can see in Times Square, for example, is very strong, this effect, and this started before, and in this painters of George Gross, we can see how this this idea of a city full of energy, or full of people, or full of light, full of sign. In beginning of 1950s, some artists understood the world of sign and languages and presenting them as a reality within art. One of the most interesting piece of art of that time, starting probably the pop art, was Richard Hamilton painting. Painting was a collage. In 1956, he made a collage called "But What Makes Today's Home So Different and So Attractive?" And he used symbols, brands, advertisement, object of life, daily life that become components of our experience as a narcissistic consumers. When Michelangelo Pistoletto produced his first mirror work, he used a simple expedient so that whoever stood in the front of the mirror entered the artist's work and became part of it. But we have to say that pop art is mostly tied to American artists, and what you see on the right is a painting by James Ross Quist called Singapore. It was also there's a description of the city in a certain sense, in a certain way. So you can see how a city could be described. Art that has become pop does not need museum or showrooms. It can live directly in a city as a contribution to the city by artists from anywhere. Bansky is in New York in 2013 offered a performance a day in October, transforming the city into his gallery and revealing works in a great treasure hunt. The work is aimed at the city and its inhabitants in a sort of dialogue made up of sign and images. So it was a very strong relation between the artist and the city became the place where the art was made, and also the citizen became part of this experience. You can see a documentary about this time where a lot of people will try to find this exhibition, this work he made, like a real looking at treasure and following this work, many things happened, and so it was an experience for all the citizens. But probably there was a link between these two generations, and this link was Jean-Michel Basquiat, that was belonging to the pop art and on the same times with the street art, I think. In architecture, I want to talk about the postmodernism that was born at the end of 1970s. That technique has an affinity with pop art, assembling elements and quotes from stereotypes of a language, canonized over the century. Its architecture abandons modernism and draws on historical element that belongs to our past and to our universal language, recognizable but repositioned and brought together with a dash of irony, sometimes, and not always. Sometimes are too much serious, but the best use the irony. We have two examples in the work of Charles Moore in New Orleans, as on the left side. This Piazza of Italia is one of the first example of modernism, and another in the extension of a National Gallery in London, built in 1991 by Robert Venturi. So advertising signature has become part of the image of the city. Think about London. Piccadilly Circus was always the brightest point of the cities, as Piazza Duomo in Milan, that since 1910 is a historical building, had been covered in advertising. On the side facing the cathedral, we have the picture of Piccadilly, and on the left side, and Milan on the right side, with the old that time, with also the fog that now doesn't exist more. The advertising, the signals were removed in the late 1990, but even for the Milanese, they were a symbol of the commercial spirit of the city. In the middle, probably the most famous light cities is Las Vegas, where the hotel and the casinos identify their bright show, are identifying by their bright show. Continuous city, Penthesilea, is different. You advance for hours and it's not clear to you whether you are really in the city, midst, or still outside it. Like a lake with low shores lost in swamps, so Penthesilea spreads for miles around. A sub-city diluted in the plain, pale building back to back in the mango fields among plank fences and corrugated iron shades. In the last century, the population growth in the world has surged from more or less 2 billion of people in 19 to quite 8 billion today. And cities comprise 55% of the world population, and this figure is growing. With a dynamic and almost swirling process, the city grows and transforms its territory, a mess of great contradiction, generating large suburbs and business districts, often characterized by the predominance of the single type of structure, office blocks. And the Umberto Boccioni painting what was considered a futurist artist show us the city rises, and the very interesting work because it's represent the dynamic forces that are changing the city and the society in that time. But it's made in 1910, so it was many years ago. And another Umberto Boccioni painter is here, the street entering the house, and Mario Sironi represent the suburbs. The morphology of a city evolution or involution, we're talking about zoning, so we can say involution, is characterized by the rise of types of areas, each defined by the activities. Industrial areas and workers' quarters are generated. The city is divided into non-homogeneous but complementary parts. There are different densities, different activities, different inhabitants, different colors and sounds. The suburbs became a new and a different city that surrounds the oldest nuclei, dispersed in the peripheral territory. These two images by Boccioni and Sironi clearly represent the ideal dynamic of transformation of the city, and on the right side, the alienation of the spaces of the industrial neighborhoods. Different shape and size characterize the neighborhoods designed near large industries. We have the Mirafiori that's in Turin. You can see the big Fiat farm and all the houses for the workers in the first part of the picture. Or the slums, and it's the Rio de Janeiro favela, that have grown spontaneously close to the large urban areas. So, but even when the suburbs offer good quality residential models, the great contradiction of mass urbanization nevertheless emerges. The city shows two faces. That for example, of the residential suburbs, very well organized and clean and perfectly and wealthy and very nice, but also the immense landfills around the city. In the end, city and eyes, Valdrada, that's the twin cities are not equal, because nothing that exists or happens in Valdrada is symmetrical. Every face and gesture is answered from the mirror by a face and gesture inverted, point by point. The two Valdradas lie for each other. They are interlocked, but there is no love between them. This metaphor of the mirror seems to link with the picture we see before, but also seems to bring us to the reality of our present day, where cities live in a reality deformed by the presence of COVID-19. The deserted public place actually hides the life that every one of us, individual and family, lives in private space. The whole city emptied of community activity appears ghostly, in a condition of absence, never experienced before. So to finish this lecture, I will go back to the words of Renzo Piano. Do you remember where we start last time? He said, I really miss contact with reality. This disease is diabolic because it prevents you from contact with things, with people. In my work, the ideas come from a giant ping pong that is played with the 20 balls, a person, an engineer, a builder, a foreman, a worker, says something which becomes an idea. When another catches it, the postpone return to receive it with different effect. Creativity is always shared. Then maybe you sit alone at the table and start to draw or write or think. I think much more willingly on the street, on construction sites, in the cafes, walking on the sidewalks. Now I think differently. If life is a large mosaic that each of us build on the wall, adding a tile every day, this is the time when you move away, take a distance, look at the dimension of things. The Ravenna mosaicists worked like this. Every no, and then they went away to better understand what was going well and what wasn't. Maybe they realized that the proportions were wrong and they had to work differently. It is not intellectual stuff. I'm not an intellectual. The farmer who sits on the door and observes the field he is working on also does so. And we finish with Moriana. From one part to the other, the city seems to continue, in a perspective, multiplying its repertory of images, but instead it has no thickness. It consists only of a face and observe, like a sheet of paper with a figure on either side, which can neither be separated nor look at each other. Thank you.